You're sitting in a quiet cafe, warm cup of coffee in hand, sunlight streaming through the window. You've got a good job, people respect you, your Instagram feed is filled with smiling faces and beautiful places you've been. On paper, everything looks perfect. And yet, there's a subtle ache in your chest. A whisper that something's missing. It's not sadness exactly, more like a quiet emptiness that no playlist, no promotion, no weekend getaway seems to touch. And then it hits you. If I'm doing everything right, why don't I feel happy? Maybe you've asked yourself that question in the silence between distractions. After the show ends, the laughter fades or the applause dies down. In those moments, there's a sense that something vital was promised, but never delivered. We've been sold a definition of happiness that sounds beautiful but feels hollow. Do what you love. Follow your passion. Live your best life. And yet the people most desperately clinging to these slogans are often the ones who feel the most lost. Here's the paradox. The more we chase happiness, the more elusive it becomes. Psychologists call it the hedonic treadmill, the idea that no matter how much we achieve, how many things we acquire, or how many goals we tick off, we always return to the same emotional baseline. Like running on a conveyor belt that moves as fast as we do. And so, we sprint harder, upgrade our phones, travel farther, earn more, smile wider. But deep down, many of us are stuck in a loop that feels more like performance than purpose. Is this what happiness is supposed to feel like? We're told that happiness is the highest good, that it's the goal of life. But look closer and you'll see the cracks in that idea. Happiness, as we know it, is often fleeting, fragile, and deeply dependent on circumstances we can't always control. It's tied to feelings, chemical flickers in the brain that come and go like weather patterns. But fulfillment? That's something else entirely. Fulfillment is quieter, less photogenic. It doesn't always come with a smile. Sometimes it comes with tears, exhaustion, even pain. Fulfillment is digging deep into life, not skipping across its surface. It's not about comfort, it's about meaning. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people aren't looking for happiness. They're looking to feel alive. But aliveness requires risk, vulnerability, depth. It's not always pleasurable. And that's why so many people reject it, because it doesn't match the shiny, sanitized version of happiness that culture keeps feeding us. So what if the way we define happiness is the problem? What if the real tragedy isn't that we can't find happiness, but that we've been chasing the wrong thing all along? Ask yourself, why do you crave happiness so badly? Who taught you what it's supposed to look like? And what happens when the feeling fades? Do you collapse or do you go deeper? Beneath the surface of our constant pursuit, beneath the motivational quotes and productivity hacks, there's an ancient human hunger not for happiness but for wholeness, a sense that life has weight, that you have weight. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And perhaps that's what the pursuit of happiness has become, a carefully curated distraction from the truth that we are not okay, not because we are broken, but because we've been living a lie. The lie that happiness is a destination. The lie that if we just get that one more thing, partner, raise, follower, freedom, it will all finally click. But what if it never does? What if this chase is the very thing keeping you from the deeper life you're meant to live? There is a deeper force at work here, something hidden in the structure of society, buried in your psyche, reinforced by every ad you scroll past. A force that doesn't just distract you from fulfillment, it makes you fear it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You begin to realize that happiness, as it's sold to you, is not just a myth, it's a form of control. A carrot on a stick to keep you running toward a future that never arrives. So the question isn't, how do I become happy? The question is, what have I sacrificed in the name of chasing happiness? This is where the story begins, not with the search for pleasure, but with the confrontation of truth. And to do that, we must go deeper. Deeper into the roots of this myth. Deeper into the systems that profit from your discontent. Deeper into the psychology that makes it all seem normal. Let's peel back the layers and see what's really been driving us all along. The lie didn't start with you. It's been whispered through centuries, woven into the very fabric of modern civilization, carried in the slogans of companies, the scripts of childhood fairy tales, and the empty smiles of public figures. From the time you could form coherent thoughts, you were taught a simple equation. Pleasure equals happiness. Happiness equals success. Success equals a life worth living. But who wrote that equation? And more importantly, Who benefits from you believing it? To understand the roots of this myth, we need to look inward, but also backward. Because this story has ancient origins, buried beneath layers of cultural programming and psychological denial. Let's start with a man named Arthur Schopenhauer, perhaps philosophy's most brutal realist. Schopenhauer didn't believe that happiness was the natural state of human beings. In fact, he argued the opposite, that life is suffering and that pleasure is simply a temporary relief from that suffering. It's not joy that defines our existence, he said, but the endless striving to escape pain. In Schopenhauer's world, happiness isn't something you achieve. It's something you briefly experience in between moments of yearning, longing, and disappointment. A flicker, a breath, then it's gone again. And yet, we live in a society obsessed with the idea of sustained happiness, a concept Schopenhauer would laugh at. Because to him, the constant desire for more is not a glitch. It's the very mechanism of human consciousness. But we don't want to believe that. We want to believe we're supposed to feel good. That pain is an error, a malfunction, a bug in the code. And so, we anesthetize ourselves with dopamine, with distractions, with dreams of the next big thing. But what we're really doing is what Carl Jung warned against, projecting our darkness outward and avoiding the confrontation with our inner truth. Jung believed that true fulfillment comes not from avoiding pain, but from integrating it, what he called shadow work. In Jungian psychology, this shadow represents the parts of ourselves we repress, deny, or reject. The guilt, the rage, the despair, the parts that don't fit into the clean, polished image of who we think we should be. And this is where the myth of happiness becomes most dangerous. Because in our pursuit of happiness, we cut ourselves off from half of our humanity. We deny struggle. We deny grief. We deny the discomfort that forces growth. We treat sadness as a problem and complexity as a threat. But what if those very emotions, the ones you've been told to push away, are the keys to depth, to meaning, to self-actualization? Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist, went even further. He believed that the human condition is defined by radical freedom, and that this freedom is terrifying. We are condemned, he said, to be free. Meaning, we are responsible for creating our own purpose in a universe that offers none by default. Think about how confronting that is. If your life has no inherent meaning, and you are fully responsible for inventing one, then happiness can no longer be a given. It becomes a byproduct, an echo that follows moments of deep commitment to something larger than yourself. This is a radically different picture than the one you're sold on social media or self-help books. Because in this worldview, the pursuit of happiness is not just misguided, it's existentially cowardly. Let's not forget Aldous Huxley, who imagined a dystopian world in Brave New World where every citizen is chemically kept happy through a drug called soma. There are no wars, no suffering, no pain, but also no depth, no art, no soul. In Huxley's world, happiness is engineered, but it costs humanity its very soul. Sound familiar? In our own time, we might not have soma, but we have the next best things. Likes, streams, apps, pills, porn, instant delivery, infinite content. We've surrounded ourselves with tools to escape the discomfort of being alive. But in doing so, we've lost something sacred, the ability to feel life in its raw, unfiltered form. And here lies the hidden problem. We think happiness is the goal, but what we actually crave is authenticity. To feel something real, to be someone real, not a brand, not a persona, not a smiling mask performing in the theater of modern life. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and existential psychiatrist, wrote, "Happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue. One must have a reason to be happy." In other words, fulfillment doesn't come from pleasure, it comes from purpose. And purpose is almost always forged in suffering, responsibility, and sacrifice. But we've built a culture that tells you, avoid pain, chase ease, stay comfortable. This is why so many people wake up in midlife with existential fatigue. They've played the game, followed the script, and reached the mountaintop, only to discover the view is hollow. Because what they were climbing wasn't their mountain. It was someone else's version of success. And here's the psychological twist. Once you're conditioned to believe happiness is the goal, any deviation from it feels like failure. You begin to pathologize natural emotions. Anxiety, sadness, even boredom become signs that you're broken, when in reality they're signals that you're alive. So we numb, we scroll, we suppress. But in doing so, we disconnect from the very parts of us that are capable of transformation. This is the hidden mechanism. The myth isn't just that happiness is achievable, it's that it's the only thing worth chasing. But if happiness is the end, what happens to depth? To meaning? To truth? The answer is unsettling. And the consequences, as you're about to see, reach far beyond individual dissatisfaction. They shape entire societies, cultures, generations. We're not just suffering from personal emptiness. We're suffering from systemic disconnection, from ourselves, from others, and from the sacred pain that makes life real. And if we don't see this clearly, the cost will be more than existential. It will be civilizational. You don't notice it at first. Not when you're busy. Not when your phone buzzes. Not when dopamine floods your brain after a new follower, a new match, a new package at your door. But there's a hollowing happening. Quiet, subtle. A fading of something that once made you feel deeply, think deeply, be deeply. You've chased happiness for so long, you didn't realize what it was costing you. This is the hidden price of the happiness myth. Because when you mistake happiness for fulfillment, you start shaping your life around avoidance. Of pain, of effort, of discomfort, of complexity. And in doing so, you become a shadow of who you could be. Ask yourself, why are people more anxious than ever in a world designed for convenience? Why is depression rising in cultures that are materially richer than any in human history? Why do people feel lonelier even while being constantly connected? It's not a lack of resources. It's not because we're lazy. It's because we're overstimulated and undernourished. We are surrounded by tools that soothe symptoms but never address the source. Imagine this, a society where the majority of people are emotionally fragile, psychologically disoriented, and spiritually bankrupt. But smiling, performing, chasing one more purchase, one more follower, one more weekend escape. That's not fiction. That's now. The happiness myth has become the perfect trap. It teaches you that any moment you're not feeling good is a problem. So instead of digging into the discomfort, asking why it's there, you run from it. And every time you run, your tolerance for real life shrinks. The result? A culture addicted to ease, allergic to effort, and terrified of introspection. Let's bring in the science. The brain, when repeatedly exposed to high dopamine stimuli, like social media, porn, sugar, video games, begins to desensitize its dopamine receptors. This means that over time, the very things that once gave you pleasure now feel dull, empty, boring. You don't enjoy them anymore, but you can't stop craving them. That's not pleasure. That's dependency. That's addiction. And addiction, as Gabor Maté explains, is not about substances. It's about pain. It's about what you're trying to escape. And in a culture where negative emotion is pathologized, the average person is always trying to escape. We escape into consumption, into fake positivity, into aesthetic self-care rituals with no substance. We medicate with more goals, more hustle, more things to chase. But deep down, we're running in circles, never asking what we're running from. This isn't just personal, it's political. Because when you're busy chasing happiness, you're not asking hard questions. You're not rebelling. You're not reflecting. You're not realizing that the system needs you to stay just happy enough not to protest. This is what Aldous Huxley warned us about. Not a world of pain, but a world of pleasure so potent that it pacifies rebellion. A society of smiling slaves. And what happens when people start to crack under the weight of this illusion? We blame them. We call them weak, unmotivated, broken. We offer therapy apps and 5-minute gratitude journals. We turn their existential despair into a branding opportunity. The market adapts. It sells wellness. But what it never does is ask, what if your pain isn't a bug, but a message? What if your emptiness is a sign that your life has been hijacked by a script that was never written for you? Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what we've created is a world full of people who have 100 hows, but no why. They know how to get rich, how to look good, how to go viral. But they don't know why they're alive. They don't know what they stand for, what they're willing to suffer for, what they die for, because they've never truly lived. This is the unseen consequence of the happiness myth. It robs life of meaning by replacing it with comfort. And it's killing us slowly with a smile. You can see it in modern relationships too. Love, once a sacred act of devotion and vulnerability, has become a consumer choice. Swipe left, swipe right, ghost, replace. Intimacy is sacrificed on the altar of convenience. Why commit to the discomfort of growth with one person when you can chase the dopamine of the next. But what we forget is that fulfillment lives on the other side of effort. Not in the pleasure of easy connections, but in the transformation that comes from enduring ones. The same is true of work. We've been sold the dream of do what makes you happy, as if the purpose of labor is entertainment. But the deepest fulfillment often comes from struggle, from building something hard, from becoming someone stronger, from meaningful sacrifice. But that requires a shift, from seeking what feels good to seeking what feels real. And maybe that's the most dangerous idea of all. Because once you stop believing the myth, the system begins to lose its grip. You start questioning the metrics of success. You stop competing for superficial status. You stop comparing your life to carefully curated highlight reels. You begin to wonder, what if happiness was never the goal? What if depth, connection, and purpose were the things you've been craving all along? What if the greatest tragedy is not a life without happiness, but a life that was too afraid to feel anything else? There comes a moment when the mask cracks, when the endless scroll no longer numbs the ache, when the next dopamine hit doesn't land, when the voice in your head, the one you've ignored for years, whispers, "This isn't it." And suddenly, everything that once felt normal starts to feel fake. This is the beginning of rebellion, not the kind that screams in the streets, but the quiet kind. The internal uprising, the moment you stop lying to yourself. It doesn't start with changing your habits. It starts with changing what you value. Because the system runs on your belief that comfort is king, that struggle is bad, that pain must be escaped, that happiness is proof of success. But once you realize that these are not truths but choices, everything begins to shift. You begin to see life differently. What if discomfort is not a threat, but a teacher? What if emptiness isn't a flaw, but a signal? What if your sadness is not something to fix, but something to listen to? This rebellion is not about rejecting happiness, it's about redefining it. It's not about becoming a monk or abandoning all pleasure. It's about choosing meaning over mood, depth over dopamine, substance over sedation. Let's go deeper. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is the essence of shadow work, facing the parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. The anger, the fear, the jealousy, the selfishness, not to indulge them but to understand them. To stop hiding from your own humanity, because hiding is exhausting, pretending is soul-crushing, and authenticity, that's where fulfillment begins. When you own your shadow, you stop needing to perform. You stop needing to be happy all the time. You stop needing the world to validate your worth. You become whole. This is why fulfillment feels so different from happiness. Happiness is a moment. Fulfillment is a way of being. Fulfillment is what you feel when you live in alignment with your values, when you tell the truth, when you choose integrity over popularity, when you embrace suffering because it's meaningful, not because you enjoy it but because it makes you real. And realness? That's the new revolution. Let's talk about counterintuitive freedom. People think freedom means doing whatever you want, but that's just another trap. Because when you're ruled by impulse, by every craving, every distraction, you're not free. You're enslaved by your own emotions. True freedom is self-mastery, the ability to choose purpose over pleasure, to delay gratification, to say no when everyone else says yes. Nietzsche didn't want us to be happy sheep. He wanted us to become the Übermensch, the one who creates their own values, the one who doesn't borrow meaning from the world, but forges it like steel. This requires courage, because it means letting go of the scripts. The script that says you need to be rich to be worthy. The script that says you must be liked to be valuable. The script that says love should be easy and life should be comfortable. All lies. All chains disguised as dreams. Rebelling means writing your own script, one that includes pain, effort, responsibility, and depth. It means doing what most people avoid, sitting in silence, asking dangerous questions, staring into the void without blinking, because somewhere in that void you find you. This is what Viktor Frankl discovered in the concentration camps, that even in unimaginable suffering, humans can find meaning. And that meaning, not pleasure, is the key to resilience. He wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." And that's the rebellion. Not changing the world first, not changing your job or your friends or your body, but changing what you believe about life. that suffering is not failure, that discomfort is not weakness, that emptiness is not depression. It might be the birthplace of purpose. The rebellion begins with questions like, what if I stopped chasing constant happiness? What if I committed to something difficult but meaningful? What if I faced my own darkness without shame? And from that soil, something new grows. You start creating instead of consuming. You start building instead of escaping. You start living instead of performing. You stop being a product of the system and start becoming a creator of your own life. This isn't motivational fluff. It's war. A war for your soul. Between comfort and conviction. Between sedation and sovereignty. Every time you choose to feel deeply even when it hurts. Every time you sit with pain instead of numbing it. Every time you act with courage instead of seeking approval. You are winning that war. And slowly, fulfillment rises from the ashes of false happiness. It doesn't come fast. It doesn't come easy. But it comes real. You laugh less but deeper. You cry more, but from a place of truth. You stop waiting for life to deliver joy and start becoming the kind of person who creates it. This is the rebellion. And it's not loud. It's not trending. But it's yours. You've walked through the illusion. You've seen how the promise of happiness was never real. You've faced the shadows, endured the void, and begun the rebellion. Now comes the part most never reach, because it cannot be told, only discovered. But here's the paradox. Once you stop chasing happiness, once you stop demanding life to feel good all the time, once you accept that pain, loss, and emptiness are part of the experience, something profound happens. Not happiness, not euphoria, something deeper. A kind of peace that doesn't glitter. It doesn't dance like joy. It sits quietly at the bottom of your being, unmoved by circumstance. Not because you've finally found the right job or person or dream, but because you've stopped searching outside for what only exists within. Fulfillment isn't something you achieve. It's something you align with. It's not a destination. It's a state of congruence between your values and your actions. It's when your soul no longer fights your choices. When your behavior mirrors your truth. When your outer life reflects your inner compass. Let's return to the man who sits at the end of the marathon. Not the one with the trophy. The one who has nothing left. His legs trembling, heart pounding, lungs on fire. But he's smiling. Not because he's happy, but because he gave everything. That's fulfillment. Arthur Schopenhauer, often called the philosopher of pessimism, believed life was suffering, but not in the Buddhist sense of detachment. For Schopenhauer, suffering is inescapable because human desire is insatiable. Yet he also said that the only real liberation comes from transcending desire itself, through art, philosophy, compassion, and ascetic reflection. In other words, you find peace when you stop needing life to fulfill your every desire. Freedom from desire is not the absence of ambition. It's the presence of purpose. It's shifting from, how do I get more pleasure, to, what am I willing to suffer for? Because the quality of your life isn't defined by how little you suffer. It's defined by how meaningful that suffering is. Fulfillment is what you feel when your pain serves something greater than your ego. When your discomfort builds something beyond vanity. When your wounds transform into wisdom. It's not something you advertise. It doesn't fit neatly into a highlight reel. It's invisible. And because of that, it's indestructible. The world can fall apart around you. People can betray you. Plans can collapse. And yet, the peace remains. Not because you're numb, but because you are anchored to something real, something no one can take. So here is the ultimate truth. The myth of happiness was never about joy. It was about control. It told you that if you followed the rules, you'd feel good forever. It turned life into a transaction. And when you didn't feel good, you blamed yourself. You thought you were broken. But you weren't broken. You were just alive in a system that told you being alive was a problem to fix. And the cure wasn't more productivity, or positivity, or purchases. It was presence. Radical, painful, awe-filled presence. To look at life, not as something to conquer or perfect, but as something to participate in with eyes wide open. Jean-Paul Sartre, despite believing life had no inherent meaning, also believed this gave us an extraordinary gift, the ability to choose our own meaning. And in that choice lies responsibility. Responsibility not to be perfect, but to be authentic, to choose to show up honestly, to speak your truth, to create something beautiful with your pain, to love even when it hurts, to keep walking through the dark not because you're promised light, but because you are the light. In this world there is no permanent high, no eternal fix, no arrival. But there can be deep, unshakable fulfillment. A quiet fire in the chest, a calm knowing behind the eyes, a posture that doesn't bend with every storm. It comes when you stop waiting for life to feel good and start living as if you already belong here. Because you do. You always have. Even when you felt unworthy. Even when you failed. Even when the world made you feel like nothing. You were never nothing. You were simply misled. Happiness was never the goal. Wholeness was. And now you know the difference. So what do you do now? You stop chasing the myth. You stop apologizing for your depth. You stop shrinking to fit into someone else's version of success. And you begin, really begin, to live with your eyes wide open. You won't always feel good, but you will always feel real. You won't always be happy, but you will often be fulfilled. And that is worth everything. Let this truth burn quietly in your chest. Let it shift the way you wake up, the way you speak, the way you choose. This isn't the end of a video. This is the beginning of a life. One not built on illusion but insight. Not based on mood but meaning. Not centered around escape but engagement. Welcome to the place beyond happiness. Welcome to fulfillment.